We're going to go ahead and get started with class. A couple of just announcements for the teens or any parents of teens. I will be updating band later this afternoon. Please just be checking for that. We will be having Olaf on Tuesday, so please make sure and check band for that. I would feel a little bit worse for everybody who showed up this morning, but I did listen to Jeff's class from last week, and at the very end of class, he warned you that he was going to be out of town and that I was going to be here. So I don't feel that bad for you because you still decided to show up, but you are stuck with me this week. We'll still be looking at Job, continuing with what Jeff was studying through, but the Grishams are out of town, left for Colorado yesterday, and sounds like they're having a blast out there. Sounds like everybody here who was involved with Family Fun Day had a blast as well. Looks like we had a pretty good turnout, and I'm excited that you all were able to come and help be a big part of that. So let's open with a word of prayer, and then we will jump into Job. God, we love you, and we are blessed to be yours, to be called your children, your people, your disciples. Just the very fact that we get to humbly fall before you this morning in worship and praise and glorify your name is a gift. And God, we are so grateful for that gift, that blessing that you have given to us. God, as we look through the book of Job, we are reminded of the horrible and atrocious things that Job had to go through. And God, we beg with you, we plead with you that we never have to experience the trials that Job did. But God, we also pray that you give us the strength to endure the trials that we do have to withstand. And I'm so thankful for this loving church family of people that we can lean on, that can comfort us, that are able to be a source of counsel and reliance when we do face these trials. Help us to continue to look at these encounters between Job and his friends and learn how we can better deal with our own encounters with one another, God. We ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I will say, although you are here anyways, the good news is that if you don't want to listen, it's okay. You've probably already heard this before, and you're going to hear it again, because Job is really a pretty repetitive book. It starts off in Job chapters 1 and 2 with some unique parts. Job goes through his trials, and then we get, I believe it's Job chapter 3 where Job has his first speech, and then 4 and 5 we start getting into the speeches of his friends. And there are 3 different discourses where each of Job's 3 friends speak to him, and Job responds. So we'll have one friend speak, Job responds, the second friend speaks, Job responds, the third friend speaks, Job responds. But that happens 3 unique times, 3 separate occasions that all 3 friends speak to Job, and then Job responds. And there's a couple of interesting things about this. One is they say pretty much the same thing over and over again. So if you listen at all, because today we're going to begin the second round of those speeches. So if you've listened at all in Jeff's previous lessons, then you've already heard a lot of what's going to be said today, and he'll say it again in a few weeks. So it is very repetitive, and that has led some scholars to believe that this may not actually have taken place. There are some scholars who look at the 3 discourses and say, okay, this is very repetitive. It just doesn't seem like this is how it would have gone. It doesn't seem very realistic. There was probably 1 discourse, and they've added 2 for kind of effect. But thankfully, we live in a world today where we know a lot better than that, and we know that nobody just makes their case one time and then shuts up. We make our case, and then we have somebody disagree with us, and we listen to that, and we say, okay, you clearly didn't hear me, so I'm going to tell you again in stronger terms. I'm going to say it a little bit louder. I'm going to use slightly more aggressive language, and then you'll understand my side. And then they say it again, and the third time, we're just telling, and we are making sure that they know how wrong they are, and we are absolutely right, so we know better than anybody. We can say it 3 times is probably an understatement. They may have gone back and forth a dozen or more times, because that's how we tend to be when we know that we're right. But the other thing is that in Hebrew poetry, this is oftentimes, it's the repetitiveness is often used to make that point, to continue to make the point of what the author is trying to get across to the reader here. And so it was not uncommon at all. We see it all throughout the Psalms. There are many Psalms where it seems like we basically have the same psalm written twice in one psalm. So the first maybe 8 verses say one thing, and then the next 8 verses say it pretty much the exact same the exact same thing, just in different terms. And so it's not uncommon in Hebrew literature to say the same thing in a couple of different ways. But also, each time, while it is quite repetitive, as I said, there's something unique about it in that each time they get more entrenched in what they already know to be true. Job's friends become more and more entrenched that Job has sinned, that Job is being punished because of something that he has done to God. If Job had not committed this treason against God, if Job had not left God, if Job had not left the faith, if Job had not been such a terrible heathen sinner, then this would not be happening. And Job entrenches himself even further in the fact that if God would just answer me, if I could just state my case, maybe we could work it out. Maybe we could find some way to get through this, and I could overcome my accuser. I could overcome the trials that I am going through. But when I look at the book of Job, I see also, for those of you who don't know this, I'm a pretty big fan of The Office. It's probably my favorite TV show of all time, and there's a quote in The Office that I think of almost every single time that I look at the book of Job. And the quote, just a little bit of background for it, Michael Scott is the main character of The Office. He's the manager, one of the main characters there, and he's a very interesting character that's not very socially aware of what's going on around him. And in this particular episode, he had just found out that his old boss had died, and the only way that this socially unaware Michael Scott can attempt to counsel the office is in a very unique way. And so when he's getting ready to counsel the office, he's in his office, getting ready to go out and comfort them over the loss of his former boss. And he has the quote, he says, "There are 5 stages to grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it is my job to get them all the way through to acceptance. And if not acceptance, then just depression. If I can get them depressed, I'll have done my job." And that is my goal with you this morning. If I can get you depressed, I think I will have done my job. When you read through Job 15 through 17, which is where we will be this morning, if you are not depressed, I have failed. We see the first 3 things. We see this is actually pretty true. Denial, anger, and bargaining. These all take place in some form in the first 2 chapters of Job. Job is at first, he's kind of in shock, like, this can't be happening. Why is this happening to me? Of all people that this could be happening to, God, why have you chosen me to test? And I think in the same way, when we face trials of various kinds, instead of going immediately to perseverance, instead of falling back on perseverance, I think oftentimes our first fallback is denial of, God, why me? Of anybody that you could have allowed to suffer in this way, why me? And then we see the change over to anger, and we may not always call it anger, but we are frustrated. We don't know why God. We're mad with God, and we see the way that Job speaks to God. He's clearly pretty angry at the fact that he's having to suffer in this way, and eventually he gets to bargaining where he's saying, maybe God, and we'll see this some in these chapters where Job ends up saying, God, I'd just go ahead and let me die because I think that's better than suffering. And he's trying to bargain his life for his suffering. But eventually he gets to the point of depression, and eventually at the very, very end of the book we get to acceptance, but we've got a lot of depression to go through to get there, and that's where we're going to spend most of today. But Job chapter 15 is Eliphaz's second response to Job. And in his second response, he has some very interesting things to say. So let's go ahead and read through. I think we're going to read the entirety of Job chapter 15 here. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, "A wise man wouldn't answer with such empty talk. You are nothing but a windbag. The wise don't engage in empty chatter. What good are such words? Have you no fear of God, no reverence for him? Your sins are telling your mouth what to say. Your words are based on clever deception. Your own mouth condemns you, not I. Your own lips testify against you. Were you the first person ever born? Were you born before the hills were made? Were you listening at God's secret counsel? Do you have a monopoly on wisdom? What do you know that we don't? What do you understand that we do not?" On our side are aged, gray-haired men, much older than your father. Is God's comfort too little for you? Is his gentle word not enough? What has taken away your reason? What has weakened your vision? That you turn against God and say all these evil things. Can any mortal be pure? Can any woman born of a woman be just? Look, God does not even trust the angels. Even the heavens are not absolutely pure in his sight. How much less pure is a corrupt and sinful person with a thirst for wickedness? If you listen, I will show you. I will answer you from my own experience. And it is confirmed by the reports of wise men who have heard the same thing from their fathers, from those to whom the land was given long before any foreigners arrived. The wicked writhe in pain throughout their lives. Years of trouble are stored up for the ruthless. The sound of terror rings in their ears, and even on good days, they fear the attack of the destroyer. They dare not go out into the darkness, for they fear they will be murdered. They wander around, saying, "Where can I find bread?" They know their day of destruction is near. The dark day terrifies them. They live in distress and anguish, like a king preparing for battle. For they shake their fists at God, defying the Almighty. Holding their strong shields, they defiantly charge against him. These wicked people are heavy and prosperous. Their waists bulge with fat, but their cities will be ruined. They will live in abandoned houses that are ready to tumble down. Their riches will not last, and their wealth will not endure. Their possessions will no longer spread across the horizon. They will not escape the darkness. The burning sun will wither their shoots, and the breath of God will destroy them. Let them no longer fool themselves by trusting in empty riches, for emptiness will be their only reward. They will be cut down in the prime of life. Their branches will never again be green. They will be like a vine whose grapes are harvested too early, like an olive tree loses its blossoms before the fruit can form. For the godless are barren. Their homes, enriched through bribery, will burn. They conceive trouble and give birth to evil. Their womb produces deceit. So if you remember Eliphaz's first speech back in, I am blanking on the chapter, forgot to write it down, but if you remember his first speech, it's 7 or 8 chapters before this, it's a little bit more gentle. This one sounds pretty harsh, even just reading through it. There's some pretty strong language in there. And his first response, his first thing that he says to Job, is more of an attempt at comfort. His first attempt at responding to Job is more of an attempt at comfort than this one right here. But how true is it that oftentimes in our dealings with others, especially when we are dealing with somebody else who is hurting, in a hurt that we do not understand, in a pain that we do not get because we have not been through it with them, do we begin by comfort, and then we slowly, the longer it goes on, begin to more harshly rebuke? I hope that you're a lot better than I am. I hope that that's not the case for you, but for me, it's very easy to at first begin to comfort someone, to, whenever they are hurting, to try to empathize with them as much as I can, which for me isn't a whole lot. I'm not the best empathizer in the world, but I try, at least at the beginning, to empathize. But the longer that it goes on, the more that it continues to endure, the more I start to question, okay, are you really trying to come out of this? Are you really trying to get to a better place, or are you allowing yourself to sit in your own pity? Are you allowing yourself to go through this for longer than you have to because you simply haven't repented? You simply haven't gotten up and done the work to get out of this trial, out of this heartache that you are enduring. But Eliphaz, just like I sometimes do, jumps pretty harshly on the rebuke train after Job does not respond positively in the first 8 or 9 chapters of rebuttal from the friends. And there are several things that we can learn from Eliphaz here. But I want you to know, as we look through chapter 15 for the next few minutes here, that if you are attempting to be a better empathizer, if you are attempting to be better at counseling your friends, at comforting your friends, your family members, your relatives, those who are grieving, those who are hurting, Eliphaz is somebody that you can learn a lot from because he would have written, Job chapter 15 could be very easily titled, The Handbook for How Not to Respond to Hurting People. So I don't want us to look at this and say, wow, Eliphaz, that is some really good advice that you have there. We have learned a lot from you. Let's go out and start treating all the hurting and sick and mourning as Eliphaz did. But instead, let's take a look at the three major things that Eliphaz does in chapter 15 that really have no place in a disagreement. If we're having a disagreement, an argument, whatever it may be, these three things have no place in it if we are really seeking to help. The very first one is that he begins by attacking Job's wisdom. I don't know what you think of 26-year-old Parker. Maybe you don't think he's the most mature in the world, but he's a lot more mature than third grade Parker. Third grade Parker was not the most mature person in the world, believe it or not. I know that may come as a surprise to some of you, but to me, this sounds very similar to how I did in third grade. He begins with several questions. The very first things out of Eliphaz's mouth in this response are, "What wise person babbles on like you, Job? Are you the first man ever born? Are you so smart because you were born before us all that you think that you know everything? Were you here when God created the world? Are you smarter than he was? What do you know that we don't? What makes you so wise and prohibits us from having that wisdom?" And then my favorite one of all, the gray-haired, older, and far wiser agree with us. That's always my favorite. If somebody with gray hair agrees with you, say, okay, I've got wisdom on my side. Gray hair agrees with me, I must be right. And that's what Eliphaz says. He says, Job, there are a lot of old people around here, and every single one of them agrees with us. You do not have any wisdom on your side. What makes you think that you're so much wiser than we are? And it reminds me a lot of third grade Parker in that I remember, I don't remember how people made fun of me in third grade. I'm sure it happened. But the one that I came up with is whenever somebody in third grade would start to make fun of me, they're like, "Parker, you're so ugly." I'm like, that's okay. You're so stupid that how would you even know that I'm ugly? And that was my comeback for pretty much everything is, you're so stupid, how would you know? And if you're stupid, then clearly your insults mean nothing to me. Because if you're not intelligent enough to distinguish between what is good looking and what is not, between what is smart and what is not, what is wise and what is not, then why do I care? If you're not intelligent enough to decipher between those two things, why should I listen to you? And so I would insult the intelligence of others, as I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who has ever done that. But if I insult the intelligence of others, it makes their rebukes, it makes their criticisms of me seem much less true, much less accurate, because why would somebody who doesn't know anything about anything be able to judge me accurately? Whenever we're dealing with people who are hurting, it is not the time for us to try to sit in the seat of judgment on whether or not a smarter decision could have landed them in a better place. Because maybe they made a really dumb decision. Maybe they did something that was very unwise and we know so much better. And that may be great to tell them after the fact. But when they are hurting, knowing what they should have done does not get them out of their current situation. All it does is remind them that they are there, and it entrenches them that whatever you say next, they don't care, because all you can focus on is the past when they are hurting in the present. When we try to deal with people's past mistakes when they are hurting in the present, all it does is hinder and hurt that relationship, and it hinders our ability to help them. The other big one comes in verse 4, the second big attack that Eliphaz makes on Job's character comes in verse 4. Have you no fear of God, no reverence for him? Another translation I have says, but you even undermine piety and hinder devotion to God. If you look at the words here in Hebrew, you probably won't understand them. Which is okay, I didn't either. But thankfully, somebody a lot smarter did in a commentary shared what those words mean and shared really what Eliphaz is probably trying to get across here. And maybe it's a lot easier for you to see in plain English, but for me, I was missing this. But it seems that what Eliphaz is doing is he is accusing Job of having left the faith. He's saying, Job, why have you no fear of God? Do you not fear God anymore? No reverence for him? You've completely left any fear of God, any following of him. You just completely turned your back on God. That's why you're hurting. That's why you're in so much trouble. That's why you're in pain, is because you have left the faith. And God punishes people who leave the faith because they haven't remained faithful. And if you don't remain faithful to his promises, then why will he remain faithful to you? And again, from the handbook of how not to respond to hurting people, it's probably not the best response when somebody is hurting to say, well, if you hadn't left the faith, maybe you wouldn't be in such a horrible situation. I don't know if you've picked the theme yet, but again, when somebody is hurting in the present, the worst thing that we can do is try to fix past mistakes. Eventually, yes, we want to get to that point. Eventually, if somebody has left the faith, we would like to bring them back. But the problem here is Job hasn't even left the faith. Job is still faithful. They are making assumptions about what Job must have done weeks ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it might be. They're making assumptions about what's happened in the past to try to fix a present, current problem. But Job has not even left the faith. Job instead is going through these 5 steps of grief. And it seems that he's probably about the stage where he's angry. And so it's easier for them to look and say, because we don't understand your anger with God, because we don't understand your pain, because we have not been in the place that you currently are, we have to assume that you've left the faith. And again, I think the worst thing that we can do when we are dealing with people who are presently hurting, especially people who are we know to be in the faith, is make assumptions about their faith based on something they've experienced that we never have. They may respond differently than we would. Jeff, in his very first lesson, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but essentially what he said is he looks at Job's rant against God in the first 2 chapters, and he says, Job has everything taken away from him, and he's pretty angry about it. But Jeff goes on to say, and what's unique about Job that maybe Job does a better job of than we do is when Job's angry with God, he lets God know. He expresses that anger. God already knows it. God knows that Job is hurting. God knows that Job is in a place of extreme pain, of suffering. And so Job just tells him. He doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't try to beat around the bush. He doesn't try to cover his face and try to look like everything is perfect. When he is struggling, he lets God know, and he lets people in to try and help him. And so when we see people who handle their frustration and their anger with God differently, again, hopefully this is more me than it is you, but it can sometimes be easy for me to make assumptions about somebody's faith based on how they handle their anger towards God. And I don't think it's in my place to judge how somebody else handles their emotions, their dealings with God when they are striving to be faithful, but also constantly looking for answers. If you're trying to be faithful but also looking for answers, sometimes those seem like they contradict, but really they go hand in hand, because Job is saying, God, I am faithful, I will remain faithful, but God, it's going to be a lot easier if you just tell me why, because I don't understand, I don't know why you have allowed this to happen to me. And if I can just have that peace of mind, I think for Job, the physical suffering, it hurts, it's rough, but for Job, the physical suffering is not the worst part of it. For him, it's the mental suffering of not knowing why. And so often in our lives and in the lives of those around us, we can have the same issue, where if we just understood why, we could get through the physical part of it. But if we don't know why, it sometimes causes us to question, not in the fact that we're ready to leave the faith, but question why us. The final one takes up most of the chapter. Verses 17 through 35, you probably noticed the first 16 verses is Eliphaz really talking to Job, just hammering home of, why are you so wise? Why do you think you're so much better than us? Why are you such a wicked sinner? And then verses 17 through 35, he changes tones just a little bit. And to put it into, to sum it up as best I can into today's English, essentially Eliphaz looks to Job and says, if you weren't such a godless sinner, a horrible heathen who clearly hates children and puppies and everything good in this life, maybe God wouldn't punish you. But since you are, you will burn in hell for all of your horrible sins. You can probably get a little bit better summary if you go for it on your own. That probably wasn't the best, most accurate summary, but essentially what he says is, Job, you're a horrible heathen sinner. You have wronged God. You have wronged us. You have wronged everybody in this world. You've turned your back on him, and you are going to burn in hell for it. And I really hope that I don't have to say this, but if you haven't learned anything from the handbook of how not to respond to hurting people, please, for everything that is good in this life, in this world, do not look at somebody who is hurting and say, well, you know what? You think this is bad? You're going to burn in hell, so enjoy this while you have it. Please do not ever respond in that way when somebody is hurting. Because again, while the first two are more so, you cannot fix a present hurt by dealing with past mistakes. You also cannot fix or help or heal a present hurt by dealing with what you believe are future judgments. The only way to fix a present hurt is here, now, in the present. Nothing in the past and nothing in the future is going to fix that. There are certain things that we can do to avoid it, to help it, to maybe change the path of keeping it from happening again and preventing some of those mistakes that maybe did lead up to that. But when somebody is presently hurting, the only way we are going to be able to connect with them and to help heal with them is in the present, by being present with them. And again, if you remember from chapter 2, I think this was still week 1 when Jeff was introducing this series, he looked at the very first thing that the friends did. They came and they sat in silence with Job for 7 days. And the biggest mistake that they made, and the biggest mistake that we still make today, is they open their mouths. And it's the biggest mistake that I make on a daily basis. You can ask my wife if you don't believe me. But for almost 40 chapters, we see that mistake play out. And what I hope we learn from these responses is that if somebody's hurting, past and future aren't going to help, but what's also not going to help is opening our mouths and babbling on in the present when we have nothing helpful to say. And so if you learn nothing from the handbook of how not to respond to hurting people, then please know the best thing you can do is sit there in silence. Job's friends did it for 7 days. We have 2 verses on that. It doesn't say much in those 2 verses, but I get the feeling that there weren't any major issues between Job and his friends. 40 chapters later, there's some pretty big issues. And the only thing that changes in those 40 chapters is his friends open their mouth, and Job as well. And so it seems that if they don't say the right thing, the only place that opening your mouth leads is to bigger issues and to more hurt. Then we get to Job's 5th speech. Man, I'm running out of time. I knew I couldn't be better than Jeff. I was hoping to get you out earlier than Jeff, but we'll see if we can finish chapter 16 and 17 pretty quick. But Job's 5th response comes here. He's responding to Eliphaz, and I really appreciate that Job responds to Eliphaz because, again, this shows a lot more maturity in Job than it does in me, because while, again, I may not be the most mature person in the world, if I've dealt with this, if I've already gone through one cycle, if I'm in the place of the hurting person, and I've listened to every single one of my friends sort of try to counsel and comfort me, but without much success, and then they come back with a harsh rebuke of essentially telling me that I've sinned and I'm going to hell, I'm probably not responding at that point. So I think Job shows a lot of maturity even by opening his mouth here, but Job continues on by saying, I've heard this all before, what miserable comforters you are. Probably my favorite line in the entire book of Job. What miserable comforters you are. So again, if you for some reason missed everything that was said about chapter 15, if you thought that Eliphaz maybe responded well or positively, Job would disagree with you. What miserable comforters you are. Won't you ever stop blowing hot air? What makes you keep on talking? Why do you keep talking? I could say the same things if you were in my place. I could spout off criticism and shake my head at you. But if it were me, I would encourage you. I would try to take away your grief. Again, it's a little bit easier to talk than it is to actually live it out. But Job gives us a pretty good idea of what's the response that we should have here. Why do you keep talking? He again tells them what I stole what I just said from Job. He says, you're pretty miserable comforters. If you can't say anything, just don't talk. But if it were me, I would have opened my mouth so that I could comfort you and try to take away your grief. He goes on in verse 6. We'll read through the end of 17 here. Instead, I suffer if I defend myself, and I suffer no less if I refuse to speak. I'm actually going to stop right there again, and then we'll get to the rest of it. But right here in verse 6, it's interesting to me that Job says the next 35 chapters, 25, however many there are here, are pretty much a waste of time, because it doesn't matter if I keep my mouth shut or if I respond to you. I'm going to be accused. I'm going to be the one who did wrong no matter what, because you're going to pin my sins on me somehow, some way, or excuse me, my trials on my sins somehow, some way, even though that's not why I'm suffering. So it's a waste of time for me to talk. And so where does Job go? He stops talking to his friends, and in verse 7, he opens his mouth. Oh God. When his friends won't listen, when everybody wants to accuse him, he turns to God. Oh God, you have ground me down and devastated my family. As if to prove I have sinned, you've reduced me to skin and bones. My gaunt flesh testifies against me. God hates me and angrily tears me apart. He snaps his teeth at me and pierces me with his eyes. People jeer and laugh at me. They slap my cheek in contempt. A mob gathers against me. God has handed me over to sinners. He has tossed me into the hands of the wicked. I was living quietly until he shattered me. He took me by the neck and broke me in pieces. Then he set me up as his target, and now his archers surround me. His arrows pierce me without mercy. The ground is wet with my blood. Again and again he smashes against me, charging at me like a warrior. I wear burlap to show my grief. My pride lies in the dust. My eyes are red with weeping. Dark shadows circle my eyes, yet I have done no wrong, and my prayer is pure. O earth, do not conceal my blood. Let it cry out on my behalf. Even now my witness is in heaven. My advocate is there on high. My friends scorn me, but I pour out my tears to God. I need someone to mediate between God and me, as a person mediates between friends. For soon I must go down that road from which I will never return. My spirit is crushed, and my life is nearly snuffed out. The grave is ready to receive me. I am surrounded by mockers. I watch how bitterly they taunt me. You must defend my innocence, O God, since no one else will stand up for me. You have closed their minds to understanding. Do not let them triumph. They betray their friends for their own advantage, so let their children faint with hunger. God has made a mockery of me among the people. They spit in my face. My eyes are swollen with weeping, and I am but a shadow of my former self. The virtuous are horrified when they see me. The innocent rise up against the ungodly. The righteous keep moving forward, and those with clean hands become stronger and stronger. In most of chapter 16 and the end of chapter 17, Job is having what I would consider to be a prayer with God. He's conversing with God. He looks up to the heavens. He says, "Oh God, you have ground me down and devastated my family. God, you have destroyed me. You have brought me to my wit's end. You have brought me to the end of the road. God, I have nothing." Reminds me of, I think it's chapter 1, verse 21, maybe 22. God is the God who gives and takes away. Job is reminding God of that, but he's past the point of the God who gives. He's at this point, you're the God who takes away. You are the God who causes suffering. You're the God who allows me to sit in my own misery and be terrible. And he continues on, reminding that his spirit is crushed, reminding of how everything is going. But then verse 3, "But God, even though you have been miserable to me in your own right, even though you have allowed great suffering that is beyond my level of comprehension. You must defend my innocence because you have prevented my friends from doing so. You have shut their minds off to where they will not listen to me. So God, you must do it. You must defend my innocence and show these people that it was not my sin that led to the suffering, but it was you that allowed this suffering. This is a place of someone who is hurting quite badly. Again, it's pretty strong language here, and again, going back to, if you're not depressed by the end of this, I meant that halfway jokingly, but also partly serious. And if you're not, by the end of these verses right here, it's probably, you're probably getting pretty close to being there. And I think it's in these final verses where we'll get to that point. But before we get there, I did want to ask a quick question. And this is a question that I don't really want you to, I don't want anybody to raise their hands or shout it out. More so, I want you to answer it yourself. But have you ever gotten to a point where you were ready to die? Where you had just had enough and said, it clearly can't get any worse, and I've lost all hope that it gets any better. I know it can't get worse, and God is preventing it from getting any better. So God, the best thing that could happen is for me to die, because my present suffering is burdening me so heavy that death and reuniting with you is far better than the life I have now. I would think that at all times, some of us maybe don't think that directly, but in more or less words, we have this thought that, man, it's pretty bad. Life is getting me down. It feels like everything is terrible, and God, I can't wait for your triumphant return, for you to come back and take us home, because God, we are suffering and we just want to be with you. Verses 10 through the end of 17, Job says, "As for all of you, come back with a better argument, though I still won't find a wise man among you. My days are over. My hopes have disappeared. My heart's desires are broken. These men say that night is day. They claim that darkness is light. What if I go to the grave and make my bed in darkness? What if I call the grave my father and the maggot my mother or my sister? Where then is my hope? Can anyone find it? No, my hope will go down with me to the grave. We will rest together in dust." I think it takes a very long time for a man like Job to get to the point where he's ready to give up on life. But I think that for all of us, we could probably endure a lot of suffering. We can probably endure a lot. Even if we don't believe it, even if we think that we can't endure much, I think we can endure a lot of physical suffering. But as I said earlier, I think for Job, it wasn't the physical suffering that made this so difficult. It was the mental suffering. Because if you've ever been in a place where you're suffering physically, you know, okay, maybe eventually I'm going to get through this. But when you're in a place where you're suffering mentally, one thing that almost everybody who's struggling with some sort of mental trial will say is the issue with that is you cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. And when you've lost hope, you've lost almost everything. Because hope is what can keep you going in the middle of turmoil. Hope is what can keep you going in the middle of the worst tragedy you've ever experienced. Hope is what can keep you going when you think that everybody around you has deserted you, has betrayed you, has left you, and when you think all you have left is God. But even if you still have God left, if you've lost all hope, then it's easy to get to the place where you think that death is your best option. And it seems that's the place where Job has reached to this point. He says, "You have taken my hope away. You have crushed my soul to the point that all I think about is death, because it's far, far better than what I have here." The question that Jeff has been asking over and over again in the series, does Job fear God for nothing? Does Job fear God for nothing? And the answer is no. Job is tired of fighting, and he's ready for God to take him. He's lost all hope at the end of the road. He's ready to be done. But even in the place of extreme anguish and being ready to die, the one thing that Job does not do is he does not turn his back on God. That's a pretty powerful faith. To get to the point where you can say, God, my life is miserable and I hope to die because I don't want to turn my back on you, and dying allows me to not have to fight for as long. That's a pretty powerful faith of saying, God, I'll just take me now because I'm not going to turn my back on you. I refuse. I will not do it. I'm going to remain faithful. But God, please just let the suffering end. That's a faith I hope we could all aspire to have, a faith where it does not matter what is thrown your way, what type of battle. It doesn't matter if you know hope at all. He still refuses to turn his back on Yahweh. It's in chapter 1, verse 21. I know I just quoted part of it. I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. Everything's been taken, and he praises the name of the Lord. But what I often forget to read after this is one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. But what we so often forget to read is the very next verse. In all of this, Job did not sin, blaming God. Over the next couple of weeks, I know Jeff's going to have a lot more to say as the friends continue to get harsher and harsher in their responses. But I hope that as we look at the 3 chapters we did this morning, especially as we look at chapter 15, the handbook of how not to deal with hurting people, that it can help us to better respond to those who are hurting around us. But that also as we read chapter 16 and 17, that we can be inspired by the faith of Job. Because sometimes we're not the friends responding to the hurting, but we are the hurting. And when we are, I hope that we, like Job, have the faith that says, God, you've given, you've taken away, but God, I will praise you no matter what. But in all of it, I will not turn my back on you. Let's close with a word of prayer. God, we love you. We are so blessed to be your children. And God, we are thankful that you're a God who is holy, God who is righteous, a God who is just, a God who loves us, has shown us kindness and mercy and favor. God, we sometimes take that favor for granted. But God, please help us not to take it for granted any longer. Please help us cherish that favor that you have given to us. Because God, when it's taken away, when we feel the pain of having blessings taken away from us, it hurts and it's hard. But God, we know that that's not the worst part of it, because even in the midst of our trials, we know that we have hope. We know that eventually we will rest with you one day. But even when our hope here on earth seems diminished, when all seems lost, God, we still will not turn our backs on you. We will continue each and every day to wake up with a new devotion, a recommitment to you, our Father. God, please continue to bless us. But God, when you don't, give us the comforters that we need to remain hopeful and to remain strong and to continue to pursue you. In the name of Jesus, amen.